Hello everybody, and yeah, we're going to make a video on this working with satin silk, and this is going to be an addition to our ontological craft terms glossary, where we learn from the materials and the characters and qualities of the materials themselves. And simultaneously, we're going to be working with covering this collar in silk. So in this we're going to share some tips around cutting and marking the silk and sewing with it as well. Although I don't think we're going to get too much sewing in this video, mostly marking and cutting and planning. We might get to sewing. And we have opened up a space of ceremony over here, as you will see. We have we want to give our thanks to the original stewards of these lands, the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute, and acknowledge that they are the stewards and continue to be, and many other tribes that continue to trade in these lands. And as we're working with our used materials today, my hope is that we can weave a stronger and conscious connection between spirit and between the materials that we have. So and also like the essence of them, the essence of the materials, if I didn't already say that. So we have this paper bag, not a Whole Foods commercial. We have this paper bag, and I'm gonna iron the collar flat first, because as we can see, when the collar is lined flat, it has like a slight curve to it. It's not like a straight line like this ruler. It's curving. And what I want to do is to trace the shape of the collar. And the reason I'm not tracing it straight on to the material is because of this seam right here. Okay? And with my pins, because I can't trace this seam, I'm going to poke my pins into it all the way along as the collar is remaining flat. and traced around just the edge. Okay, and then we can take the pins out. Make sure you're poking through the paper so that there are holes in the paper. And I'm going to circle the holes so I know where they are as I connect this line. Okay, and now we have the shape of our collar. Can you see it slightly? Well, now we need to add seam allowance, but we're kind of coming up to the edge, so I'm going to need to open the bag up. Well, I'm going to need to cut it out anyways, but cutting out the bag, cutting out the collar so that there's going to be at least room for like a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or like a pinky size. A pinky width. And then with our pinky width and our pen, we're gonna iron this flat. Yeah, so with our pinky width, we're gonna go all the way around, adding the seam allowance. Okay, and then once we have it, we can cut it out, including the seam allowance. Folding it in half to get the center mark, and because that's going to be important to help line up the collar when we're sewing it, because because if you have your collar, you can fold this in half and mark with chalk or with your pins, mark the center on the top and the bottom, and then you're going to do the same when you cut out the sateen, so that it'll help you line it up so it's not stretching to one side or the other. Okay, so here's our collar, and now the reason why I have this blue material here is this lighter blue material is something that can help when working with sateen, or any kind of like slippery material, and it'll be helpful to kind of like line up the edges like perpendicular to the edges of the material, or parallel, I mean. like along this and along all the lines, just to make sure that the grain is not shifted, because then when you cut it out it'll be shifted and then it'll make it kind of twisty to when you're sewing it. So if you can line up all the edges onto a piece of material that's like flat, it could be wool, it could be cotton, something, or hemp, just something that is flat that you could lay it on, because it'll help when you trace it, because if you trace it on a slippery surface, it's going to be hard to trace and it's going to move around a lot, but having it laid on top of this is going to help it stay. Okay, and then we're going to lay the pattern piece, and ideally you want this fold line to be parallel with one of the edges. Okay, and that will also help keep it on grain so it's not like moving, or it's not like twisty, because if you cut it like this then it's going to be on bias and then it's going to stretch, and that's going to make it more difficult to sew onto the other collar. So yeah, so lay it out. I like to get little weights and use some, and then take your chalk or your marker, whatever you have, and just trace all the way around. And because collars have two sides, we're going to then trace a second one. And then do the same thing, where you trace around it, and then when you're done, then you can take your scissors and cut out the collars, and then you'll have two collars, right? You're gonna have two pieces that are this shape, okay? And so if we look at this, remembering which side is the top edge and which side is the bottom edge, when you're sewing these pieces that are fabric, like pretend this is the fabric piece, when you're sewing it, you're going to want to sew around the edge, so this outer short edge, and then this top edge and this outer edge, and you're going to leave this one open, and then you're going to flip it inside out, iron it, and then you can kind of like put it over. Well, actually, before you do that, it would be good to like fold, if this will help it sew easier, to like fold the fabric on the inside edge, fold it inside, so that when it's sewn, the folds of the brought open edges are going like this, folding them on their seam allowance, and then press ironing them, folding and ironing, and folding and ironing, and then when you do that, then you can just slip it over this collar, the collar that you're covering, and sew it on one side, and then sew it on the other side with a whip stitch or whatever stitch that you want to do. And you just, it's going to line up with this edge, so when you're sewing it, you can just line it up with that line, and it should fit snugly on there. Alright, that is what I have. That felt more technical in its approach, and so So I'll give thanks to the trees that made this paper. Do you have any insight for us, paper? I'm hearing to be alone in your hearts with none other than the Son of God. And that feels very Christian, and I want to hold that what the sun is lightly. The sun that rises in the east and sets in the west. Today the sun has already set in the west where I am. So what does that mean to be alone with the Son of God in my heart? Well, the sun feels like this massive ball of energy. And something that gives us energy, but also it can burn if it's too bright. If it's too hot. The shirt was made in India, the label says, where it gets pretty hot from the sun. I don't know where this scarf was made, but it's polyester. And the son of my ancestors, our ancestors whose oil made this scarf. This like shiny, slippery texture that reminds me of like the dark night sky. Thinking about our atmospheres and I'm getting a sense of the aloneness, like being alone in our oneness, because it's been the same sun as far as I know, across time and space, at least in this solar system. So yeah, feeling that connection. In this process. So thank you.